I bought a 2016 Polaris Ranger knowing the engine was locked up. Also, a tree fell on the back of it and destroyed the bed. So naturally, I thought it sounded like a pretty good deal. But here's the kicker. I never rebuilt the engine. I never replaced the bed. I really didn't do anything. And I sold it for more than twice what I paid. This is the Ranger after I brought it home. Looking at it from the front, it really didn't look that bad. The body had some cracks and cosmetic damage, but overall it was still fairly complete and looked halfway decent. It had a roof, a winch, power steering, decent wheels and tires, and most of the important stuff was still there. The two major problems were behind the seat. The first problem was the engine. It wouldn't even turn over, and I had no idea exactly what was wrong with it. That's the problem when you buy something with a locked up engine. You just don't know what the problem is until you tear into it. The second problem was the bed. A tree had fallen across the rear of the Ranger and destroyed the original bed. The bed had already been taken off by the time I took these pictures. That's why the engine and the whole rear end is completely exposed. I did still have the damaged original bed, and there was a makeshift flatbed that came with it. Unfortunately, I didn't take pictures of either one of those. At the time, I never even thought about making a YouTube video about it. That's one lesson I'm already learning with this channel. Take pictures of everything. Even with those problems, I thought a 900 XP Ranger with electric power steering was still a pretty desirable machine. And because I could do the work myself and fabricate a bed or repair the old one if I have to, I thought it was probably a good buy. Worst case scenario, I could part it out and more than likely recover my money. I found this Ranger through a friend. He had taken it in on payment for some work that he had done. And he offered to let me have it for $1,000 and he'd deliver it. Sounds like it's too good to pass up, so I didn't. At that price, I felt I couldn't go wrong. The wheels, tires, suspension, axles, all that stuff was worth well more than $1,000. So if I couldn't fix it, at the very least I could part it out and probably still make a couple bucks. The rest of the Ranger was actually in fairly decent shape. The front body work was complete. The interior was kind of dirty and worn, but it was all there. The dash and everything worked. Steering column was fine. It also had some, I don't know if they were aftermarket seat covers, but not original. At least there were no tears or really worn areas. From most angles, it looked like a Ranger that was definitely worth saving. My original thought was that I'd pull the engine, tear it down until I found the problem, and possibly rebuild it. I had rebuilt an engine before for a previous Ranger that we had, and it's not too difficult, but it is a little pricey. But once a Ranger got here, it just became one more project waiting to get worked on. It was taking up space and frankly tying up some money. And really, I couldn't even estimate the cost to fix it until I tore into it. You know, once I started tearing this thing apart, I would be committed. A complete Ranger with a locked up engine, still fairly easy for a potential buyer to understand. But a Ranger with the engine removed and parts scattered all around the shop and no definitive repair estimate, that can be much harder to sell. So before taking it apart, I decided to find out whether someone might like to buy it exactly the way it is. This is where this project changed from a repair experiment to a sell it experiment. Instead of putting more money into it, I just listed it on Facebook Marketplace. I wasn't trying to mislead anybody in the listing. I listed it honestly and as detailed as I could. I mentioned the engine was locked up and I had no idea why, that the bed was missing, although there, but damaged, and that it included another flatbed that somebody might be able to make work. I wasn't trying to convince somebody that it was a ready-to-run Ranger. It was a project, and I advertised it that way. So I listed the Ranger for $2,200, and about 2 weeks later it sold. That gave my original investment back and left me with about $1,200 in profit. And that profit came without rebuilding the engine, buying an engine, installing a bed, or parting it out. Now, I don't want to make this sound easier than it was. There was still some risk involved, even though it was $1,000. You know, somebody may value it for less than what I thought it was. I may barely break even or not even break even. But at least I didn't have to rebuild an engine, buy an engine, or tear it down and part it out and spend probably months or more trying to sell individual parts. And then what am I left with? Just a shell of a machine that I would more than likely have to just scrap. But let's be honest, overall, the investment was pretty low and the effort was, well, it was just as low. What made this deal work was the extremely low purchase price. They say a profit's not made when you sell, it's when you buy. And I made money because I bought it cheap enough. If I wasn't able to sell it, I could have still parted it out and spent the time taking parts off and possibly shipping them. It would have been a slow process, but I feel pretty confident I could have at least broken even. If I had found an engine that was relatively inexpensive, I could have swapped the engine out and probably gotten a lot more for the Ranger. But as I said earlier, I have projects stacking up in the shop and just didn't have time to get to it. I figured it was better to try to sell it than just let it sit in the shop and take up space. The good thing is I wasn't forced into any one option. Flexibility was my option. It was flexibility that reduced the risk. You know, it also helped that the Ranger presented pretty well. From the front and the sides, it looked like a pretty complete machine. It had a roof, the front bodywork was decent, wheels and tires, suspension, all that looked pretty good. There was accessories still there. It was missing the bed and the engine was exposed, and that looked kind of dramatic, but a buyer could clearly see what he was getting. I believe that made it much easier to sell than, a completely torn apart project would have been. The other lesson learned in all of this is that not every project has to be a restoration. I like fixing things, and when I get something, the first thing I do is think about how I'm going to repair it. I'll start searching for parts, even if it doesn't need it. I become obsessed on whatever project I happen to be working on. But the purpose of One Less Workday isn't to see how many unfinished projects I can cram in my shop. The purpose is to find realistic ways that I can make extra income and eventually buy back some of my time. In this case, selling the Ranger without repairing it was the smart move. It put a couple grand in my pocket, freed up shop space, and allowed me to move on to another project. So was the Polaris Ranger worth buying? I'd say so. I put $1,000 into it, more than doubled my money, didn't do any work to it, spent a few, days or weeks answering questions on Facebook Marketplace, putting up with the dumb comments. If you've ever sold anything on Marketplace, you know what I'm talking about. I didn't have to rebuild the engine. I didn't have to fix or put on a new bed. And I didn't have to spend weeks parting it out. Would I do it again? Absolutely. Provided I can get it at a great price. And that's the key. You can't buy it at what you think it will be worth once it's all fixed. The numbers have to work even if the repair never happens. This Ranger wasn't a huge payday, but it was decent. I'll turn $1,000 into $2,200 all day long. And small wins like that are exactly what I'm looking for. The question behind this channel is whether projects like this can eventually help me replace one workday at a time. This is One Less Workday. Have you ever bought a project like this with intent on repairing it and decided it's probably better if I sell it just like it is? Let me know in the comments. And if you have any other income ideas, let me know. I'll try them out so you don't have to.